What if I told you that the fastest way to change your life today is not to move faster, manifest harder, or hustle more, but to do something your nervous system has been trained to fear? Hold completely still. Not still as in frozen with anxiety, but still like a mountain watching weather pass. Still like a witness on the riverbank while the water of your thoughts rushes by. If you're seeing this, there is a good chance you've been caught in a loop lately. Same arguments, same money stress, same late-night spiral on your phone, telling yourself, tomorrow I'll finally change, only to watch tomorrow arrive wearing the exact same costume. It's not because you're weak, broken, or spiritually behind. It's because no one ever taught you how powerful the way you observe your own life actually is. You've been living as the water, not the riverbank. You've been identified with every wave instead of remembering you are also the vast sky that lets clouds come and go. And hidden inside that simple, quiet shift, from water to riverbank, from cloud to sky, is something physicists stumbled on and named the Quantum Zeno Effect, a strange behavior in the subatomic world where whatever is watched closely enough tends to stay exactly as it is. Today, we're going to borrow that idea not as rigid science, but as a mirror. This is educational, not medical advice, and we're not doing physics proofs. We're asking a different question. What happens to your reality when you learn to hold still as the observer, instead of constantly poking, judging, and panicking at every emotional particle that passes through you? Because right now, without realizing it, you may be using a kind of emotional quantum Zeno effect against yourself. Every time you check your bank app in fear, replay that conversation in shame, scan your body for what's wrong, you are measuring the same state over and over again. You collapse the same version of you again and again just by the way you look at yourself. Your breath tightens, your chest contracts, your field turns noisy, and the timeline that could have opened in front of you quietly closes its doors for one more day. If all of that feels painfully familiar, you are not alone. The culture trained you to confuse movement with change, noise with progress, urgency with importance. You've been taught to react instantly, to answer every notification, to respond to every emotional ping like a lab animal in a maze, instead of realizing you were meant to be the one holding the maze in your hands. In this video, I'm going to invite you into a different experiment. You were meant to hold still today, not forever, not as an escape from responsibility, but just long enough to step out of the loop and into the gap, that subtle space between trigger and reaction, where your entire reality can be re-encoded. We'll explore how your attention can stop freezing old patterns in place and start melting them, how stillness can become a strategy instead of a shutdown, and how, by becoming the calm observer of your inner particles, you begin to win in a way the old you didn't even know was possible. For the next few minutes, you don't have to fix your whole life. You only have to do one radical thing in a restless world. Stay, notice, and let yourself be the field rather than the storm moving through it. You've probably felt it for a long time now, the sense that your life keeps circling the same gravitational well, as if some invisible pattern keeps pulling you back into familiar reactions, familiar outcomes, familiar versions of yourself. It isn't laziness, and it isn't fate. It's something far more mechanical, almost elegant in its repetition. Think of it as a reality loop formed not by events, but by perception. Every loop starts with a trigger, a message you weren't expecting, a tone in someone's voice, a number that wasn't what you hoped for. The moment it appears, your breath subtly shifts, tightens, shortens, rises higher in the chest. This tiny physiological change becomes the first domino, often ignored, yet profoundly consequential. In that micro shift, your brain reads, "We're not safe." And before you consciously choose anything, you have entered a narrowed state where the world looks more threatening than it did 5 seconds ago. From here, meaning blooms instantly. Your mind begins narrating. Here we go again. I knew this would happen. People always treat me this way. Money is always tight. These interpretations are not neutral. They are old scripts, shaped by past experiences, encoded into your nervous system like grooves on a vinyl record. And because they are familiar, they feel true. You rarely question them because they rise so quickly that they appear as simple observations rather than inherited interpretations. But in that moment, you're no longer observing reality. You're reinforcing an old one. Action follows meaning. Maybe you shut down. Maybe you chase validation. Maybe you defend, avoid, please, overwork, overthink, or numb. Not because you're flawed, but because your body is attempting to complete an old cycle it never resolved. And that action leads to evidence. Evidence that seems to prove the meaning was correct all along. If you withdraw, others might respond with distance. If you over-pursue, they may pull back. If you brace for disappointment, you may interpret neutral events as rejection. The world begins matching the shape of your expectation, not because it's destined, but because your perception quietly herded you toward it. This is the perceptual crisis almost everyone lives inside without knowing it. The loop that says, I see it, therefore it's real, when the deeper truth is, I experience it, therefore I reinforce it. You aren't just encountering your reality, you're continually measuring it with your attention, and whatever you measure repeatedly tends to stay frozen. That's the emotional version of the Quantum Zeno mirror. Every time you look at your life through the same lens, you collapse the same possibility into the same outcome. The tragedy is that most people spend decades trying to change their circumstances without ever changing the lens through which they observe those circumstances. They switch jobs but keep the same beliefs. They enter new relationships but maintain the same wound-driven reflexes. They chase new opportunities but carry the same dread in their breath. Without realizing it, they keep measuring the same state inside themselves, and so the outer world appears eerily consistent. You might recognize this feeling. The sense that progress comes in bursts but collapses quickly. The sense that no matter how many intentions you set, some deeper momentum pulls you back. The sense that your reactions fire faster than your awareness, as if you're watching someone else steer your life for you. This isn't because you lack will. It's because your perception has been operating like a closed-loop system trigger. Breath shift, meaning action, evidence run again and again until it becomes invisible. The loop hides inside your nervous system, wearing the face of just how things are. But here's the quiet truth most people miss. Your trigger isn't the problem. Your meaning is. That meaning is an old map drawn by an old version of you who didn't have the tools you're learning now. And because meaning arrives faster than conscious thought, you often assume it is reality, instead of remembering it as interpretation. This is why you feel stuck. You're not living your life, you're living your interpretations of your life, encoded through years of repetition. And because the breath responds instantly to interpretation, your body becomes the amplifier of old stories, rather than the doorway to new ones. The perceptual crisis is not that you see wrongly, it's that you don't see freshly. Your awareness has been habitually directed toward the same emotional coordinates, and attention, when untrained, becomes gravity. But gravity can be escaped the moment you learn to do what almost no one teaches. Interrupt the measurement. The moment you hold still, the loop weakens. The moment you observe the trigger without collapsing into meaning, you slip out of the orbit that kept pulling you back. The moment you breathe without tightening, without bracing, without narrating, the old scripts lose their authority. You are not failing to change. You are measuring yourself too quickly, looking at yourself too harshly, concluding too soon. You've been collapsing your potential into your familiar self before it has a chance to unfold. And the entire reason we're here today is to help you step out of that loop, not by force, but by stillness, not by fighting your reactions, but by learning to observe them without feeding them. The crisis dissolves the moment you understand that perception is not just a window, it's a creator. And once you learn to hold still in the right way, reality stops looping and starts opening. To understand why stillness changes everything, you have to step into the quantum idea not as a scientist with equations, but as a human being with a heartbeat, breath, and a field of awareness that is always shaping the world you move through. Think of quantum concepts here as mirrors, ways of seeing yourself more clearly, not as scientific prescriptions. This is educational, not medical or scientific advice. What matters is how these ideas feel inside your lived experience, not how they behave in a laboratory. At the smallest scales of existence, reality doesn't behave like solid objects bouncing around. It behaves more like possibility, soft, fluid, responsive. Particles don't sit still waiting to be found. They exist in clouds of potential until something observes them. Only then do they choose a location or a state. When physicists first discovered this, they were astonished. The act of looking seemed to influence what was seen. It made no logical sense in classical terms, but it made deep, intuitive sense in the language of consciousness, because you already know this in your bones. You felt how your inner state affects what you notice, what you attract, what you interpret, and what you become. When you're anxious, the world seems sharp, fast, overwhelming. When you're grounded, the same world feels spacious, workable, almost soft. Nothing outside changed, only the observer changed. And when the observer changes, the particle of your moment collapses into a different form. The observer effect, metaphorically, is the reminder that your presence matters. The way you look at your life is not passive, it is participatory. You are not a spectator in your reality. You are a co-author. You are the riverbank noticing the water. And in noticing, you shape the river's expression. Your attention is not light, it is gravity. Where it rests, reality begins to settle. But the deeper layer, the part most people never discover, is coherence, the emotional equivalent of alignment. Coherence is not perfection. It's not calmness that never wavers or enlightenment that floats above human messiness. Coherence is simply you becoming one thing instead of many fragments. It is your breath, your awareness, your posture, your intention, and your inner story moving in the same direction for even a few seconds. And in those seconds, probability shifts. New outcomes become available. Old patterns soften. Possibility expands. When you are incoherent, scattered, stressed, rushing, contracting, the field of your awareness becomes noisy. Your inner world behaves like static, and static tends to recreate what it already knows. Chaos tends to repeat itself. You can want change, beg for change, visualize change, but if your inner environment is broadcasting fragmentation, the reality that forms around you will have the same texture. That's why life often feels like you're moving through repeating scenes. It isn't because you're cursed or forgotten by whatever you believe in. It's because incoherence keeps collapsing the same version of you over and over again. Not on purpose, not as punishment, simply because that's the place your attention rests the most. Incoherence is a kind of accidental Quantum Zeno Effect. Too many rapid measurements, too much poking, too much habitual checking of the self through the old lens. But something extraordinary happens the moment you enter even a few seconds of stillness. Stillness is coherence's doorway. It quiets the static. It removes your hand from the old levers. It stops you from measuring the same inner state and allows a new state to form on its own. In those seconds, reality has room to breathe, to reorganize, to respond to a calmer observer. You know the feeling. A moment of clarity that arrives in the shower, insight that surfaces when you stop trying, peace that shows up uninvited after a long cry, or a breath you didn't realize you were holding. These moments are not accidents. They are the natural consequence of coherence returning after a long stretch of internal noise. Think of your consciousness as a field, a spacious, invisible atmosphere surrounding your experience. This field is not made of thoughts. It is made of the awareness that holds thoughts. It's the sky, not the clouds. And the sky can open or contract, depending on how you inhabit it. When you are hurried or self-critical, the field collapses around you. It tightens. Its edges move closer. You feel smaller because your awareness is smaller. But when you breathe with presence, when you observe without rushing, when you hold still long enough to witness your inner movements without becoming them, the field expands. Your capacity grows. Possibilities widen. The world becomes less sharp and more three-dimensional again. The quantum metaphor reminds you that nothing is fixed until it's observed. And observation is not just seeing, it's the quality of seeing. Two people can look at the same situation and collapse entirely different realities from it because their inner fields are different. One sees threat, one sees opportunity, one sees rejection, one sees neutrality, one sees chaos, one sees potential rearranging itself. The event didn't change, the observer did. When you hold still today, you reclaim the power to collapse a different possibility. You stop reinforcing the old version of yourself through frantic checking, and you begin allowing a new version to take shape not as fantasy, but as a natural outcome of coherent awareness. Stillness is not absence. It is participation at a higher resolution. It is you becoming the field rather than the noise inside it. And once you feel this, once you experience reality shifting because you shifted the way you observe it, something inside you recognizes the truth. You were never powerless. You were simply measuring yourself too quickly to ever change. Long before anyone spoke of particles or probabilities, ancient traditions were already pointing toward the same truth through symbols, stories, and practices that helped people experience stillness as a threshold rather than a stopping point. These cultures didn't use language like observer effect, but they understood something eerily similar. The quality of your inner attention determines the shape of your outer world, and the metaphors they used still carry power today, not because they are scientifically precise, but because they speak a language your nervous system understands. Imagine for a moment the Egyptian idea of Ma'at, not just a goddess, but a principle, a way the universe holds balance and truth. In Egyptian temples, Ma'at was often depicted with a single feather, the symbol of a heart unburdened. When a person died, their heart was weighed against that feather, not to judge morality in the modern sense, but to measure coherence. A heavy heart overfilled with unfinished stories, emotional storms, and reactive impulses could not pass through the next threshold. Only a heart that had learned the art of stillness, of balance, of truthfulness to itself, could move forward. Seen through the Quantum Nexus lens, Ma'at is a metaphor for the way your inner field either weighs you down into old futures or lifts you into new ones. When your attention is chaotic, when your breath is tight, when you collapse into old meanings, the heart becomes heavy not physically, but energetically, psychologically, perceptually. A heavy heart collapses familiar realities. A light heart opens new ones. And the ancient Egyptians knew the difference was not determined by external achievement, but by how one held stillness. They built entire initiation chambers around this idea. Stone rooms designed to amplify silence, to strip away distraction, so the initiate could meet their own awareness without the interference of noise. To sit in such a chamber was not a passive act. It was a confrontation with the self. It was the training of the observer before the concept of observer effect existed. You learned to watch your fears without becoming them. You learned to let your breath settle until your inner field aligned with the feather. When you emerged, the world looked different, not because the world had changed, but because you had become a different observer. Now, let's bridge this with another lineage, Buddhist anapanasati, the practice of mindful breathing. The Buddha never used the language of physics, yet he taught a method that feels uncannily similar to what we are exploring. Attending to the breath without forcing it, observing sensations without collapsing into them, allowing thoughts to drift like clouds across a sky that remains untouched. In anapanasati, the breath becomes a doorway. The practitioner watches the inhale, the exhale, and the subtle pause between them. That pause, peaceful, quiet, easily missed, is the same gap we've been discussing, the same threshold where possibility reorganizes before the next moment takes shape. In both traditions, the chamber of Ma'at and the breath of anapanasati, the teaching is the same. Stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is a threshold. Stillness is the place where you step out of the loop long enough for a new path to form. The Egyptians built stone temples to hold that stillness. The Buddhists built inner temples in the breath. Both understood that something sacred happens when awareness stops chasing its own projections. The Egyptians spoke of opening the mouth, a ritual that symbolizes awakening consciousness, the moment a being becomes fully aware of itself. The Buddhists spoke of seeing clearly, a moment when the observer finally recognizes the nature of mind. These ideas are different languages for the same experience. When you hold still, you become able to see without distortion. And when you see without distortion, the world responds differently to you. Consider the sky and clouds metaphor, the one many traditions arrived at independently. The sky represents awareness, boundless and steady. The clouds represent thoughts, emotions, sensations, temporary, shifting, never truly you. When people are caught in the perceptual loop, they mistake themselves for the clouds. They believe the storm is who they are. Stillness is the act of remembering you are the sky. And the sky does not fight clouds. It does not argue with them. It does not cling to them. It simply lets them pass. This is the emotional essence of the quantum idea. What you do not cling to cannot collapse you into an old state. What you observe gently has space to reorganize. Ancient Kabbalists spoke of ruach and neshamah, two layers of soul. Ruach is the emotional wind that moves through you. Neshamah is the quiet, steady flame of awareness. When you live in ruach alone, you're tossed by gusts of thought and reaction. When you access neshamah, your awareness becomes an anchor. Modern metaphors call this observer consciousness. But the soul, language communicates something softer. You are the flame, not the wind. These traditions weren't trying to control reality. They were trying to align with it. That alignment is what we call coherence. And coherence, across cultures, has always been found not in force but in stillness. Ma'at's feather floats. The Buddhist breath softens. The Kabbalistic flame steadies. The sky opens. The riverbank watches. In every metaphor, stillness is the doorway to seeing clearly, acting wisely, and awakening the part of you that shapes your experience without strain. Today, you are being invited to step into that same threshold, not by traveling to a temple, but by entering the stillness within your own breath, by discovering that the ancient pathways were never outside you. They were maps to the observer you are becoming now. Concepts mean nothing unless they can be lived. Stillness is not an idea you admire. It is an experience you enter, a doorway you feel with your own breath, a shift that rearranges the inner atmosphere long before the outer world catches up. What I'm about to guide you through is gentle, simple, and repeatable. It is not medical advice. It is a contemplative practice, a way of meeting yourself with awareness rather than urgency. You can do it seated, standing, or lying down, as long as you feel safe and undisturbed for a few minutes. And remember, the goal is not perfection. The goal is noticing. First, settle your body. Not in a rigid pose, not in forced straightness, just enough alignment so your breath can move freely. Let your shoulders relax by a few millimeters, just enough to signal that you are stepping out of the loop for a moment. Feel the weight of your body, the contact with the chair or floor. That contact is your first anchor. You are here. You are supported. Nothing has to be solved in this moment. Now, without changing your breath, simply notice it. Where does the inhale begin? Does it start low in your belly or high in your chest? How long is the exhale compared to the inhale? Is there a pause between them? You're not fixing anything. You're witnessing the rhythm that has been running on autopilot for years. The breath you observe right now is a portrait of your current inner field. You're learning to read it without judgment. Next, shift your awareness to the gap, the subtle moment between inhale and exhale. You don't have to lengthen it. You don't have to deepen it. Just feel it. A small suspension, a quiet doorway, a moment the world forgets to move. Most people skip past this microspace completely, yet this is where the perceptual loop loosens. This is where meaning hasn't formed yet. This is where the old story hasn't collapsed back into place. Let the next few breaths slow naturally, not by force, but by permission. As the rhythm softens, place your attention on the area just behind your forehead, the space of awareness rather than thought. Imagine that this awareness extends outward like a calm field surrounding you. You don't have to visualize anything dramatic. Just sense openness, subtle, steady, spacious. Now bring your attention to the center of your chest. Not the physical heart, but the emotional center behind the sternum. Notice whatever is there. Maybe there's tightness, maybe there's warmth, maybe there's nothing in particular. All of it is welcome. Your job is observation, not correction. The moment you observe without collapsing, coherence begins quietly assembling itself. If any tension appears, breathe around it, not into it. Imagine your breath flowing like a river around a rock. The water doesn't push. It doesn't fight. It simply makes space. That making space is what dissolves the internal noise. You are learning to be the river and the riverbank, at once the movement and the observer of movement. Now, as your breath settles into its natural rhythm, I invite you to try a micro protocol you can use anywhere during a conversation, in a moment of overwhelm, in the middle of a difficult decision. It's called the Notice Anchor Allow cycle. Notice. Feel the first signal of contraction, your breath catching, your shoulders rising, your thoughts speeding. Don't label it. Just name it silently. Noticing. Anchor. Bring awareness to one point, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the contact of your hand on your leg, or a slow exhale. This pulls you out of the automatic loop long enough to reclaim choice. Allow. Instead of resisting the emotion or story, let it exist without merging with it. Allowing doesn't mean agreeing. It means you are the sky. letting the cloud pass without collapsing your identity into its shape. This 3-second protocol is how you interrupt the emotional quantum Zeno pattern. You stop remeasuring the same state. You create a moment where something new can form before meaning rushes in. Another daily life practice you can use is oval breathing, a slow, gentle breath that traces an oval shape in your awareness. Inhale up the left side of the oval, pause gently at the top, exhale down the right side, pause again at the bottom. Smooth, rounded, unhurried. This breath calms the nervous system without forcing it and invites coherence with surprising ease. To close this practice, bring attention to the space around your body, your field. Sense it as a soft sphere, extending a foot beyond your skin. Imagine your breath subtly expanding and smoothing this field, like ripples quieting on a lake. Coherence isn't something you create. It's something you stop interfering with. When the internal noise softens, the field organizes itself. Take a final slow inhale, pause gently in the gap, then exhale as if you're releasing an old storyline you no longer need to carry. Not forcing it out, just letting it drift. And now notice, you are still here. The world hasn't demanded anything from you in these last moments. You have stepped into the observer. You have held still long enough to feel the difference between reacting and witnessing. This is the doorway the ancient metaphors were pointing toward. This is the state where a new reality begins to form. There comes a moment in every inner journey when you realize the world hasn't been working against you. It has simply been mirroring the state you've been observing yourself from. That moment is the hinge, the turning point, the quiet astonishment of discovering you were never trapped in your circumstances, only in the viewpoint through which you interpreted them. Up until now, much of your life may have been lived from the reactor self, the version of you shaped by old meanings, old breath patterns, old reflexes that snapped into place faster than awareness could intervene. But something shifts once you experience the observer, not intellectually, but viscerally. You begin to sense there is a version of you who does not collapse into every thought, who does not freeze into every emotional signal, who does not obey the old gravitational pull of past patterns. And that realization marks the beginning of agency, not the loud motivational kind, but the quiet, coherent kind that rearranges your life from the inside out. The transition from victim to creator is not a heroic leap. It is a series of small, repeated choices in the moments that once felt automatic. A breath you don't rush, a pause you don't fill, a meaning you don't assume, a story you don't feed. These tiny acts of stillness weaken the perceptual loop until you begin noticing something incredible. What you don't immediately react to often dissolves on its own, and what used to trigger you begins losing its script. You realize that you can step into the gap before the old pattern reaches for you, and in that gap, the universe becomes editable. Let's explore how this shift plays out in real life in scenes where most people feel powerless. These aren't fantasies. They are grounded examples of what happens when you enter coherence instead of collapsing into chaos. Scene 1. Money. You open your banking app and see a number lower than you hoped. Previously, your chest would have tightened, your breath would have shortened, your mind would have whispered, "You're behind, you're failing, it's happening again." That old loop would trigger urgency overworking, spiraling, catastrophizing, reinforcing the same financial narrative. But today, you notice anchor allow. You notice the contraction before the story forms. You anchor to a slow exhale. You allow the feeling of pressure without letting it define you. In that 2-second shift, something profound happens. Instead of collapsing into the old meaning, you observe the number from a steady field. And from that field, you can think clearly. You can strategize. You can innovate. You can reach out for support. You step into the creator position not because you forced abundance, but because you refused to freeze into scarcity. Money begins to shift because you, the observer, shifted. Scene 2. Relationship. A loved one says something sharp. In the past, your reflex might have been to defend, withdraw, or mirror the tone, not because you wanted conflict, but because an old wound reacted faster than your clarity. The loop would reinforce itself. Tension creates tension, but now you catch the moment your breath rises. You pause. You hold still. In that quiet beat, you sense something crucial. The comment wasn't about you. It was about their state. From the observer, you respond differently. You ask a grounded question. You speak gently. You hold your boundary without the tremor of defensiveness. The interaction softens because you chose coherence instead of reaction. The relationship recalibrates itself to match your steadiness. This is how stillness heals connection without force. Scene 3. Leadership. You're facing a room, a team, a decision that affects others. Pressure used to make you overcompensate too many words, too many explanations, too many sudden choices driven by fear rather than vision. But today you feel the familiar pressure rising and immediately step into the gap. You let the silence settle. You breathe once, not dramatically, but intentionally. In that breath, your mind clears. Your presence deepens. Others feel the shift without knowing why. You speak from coherence instead of panic. You choose strategy instead of urgency. You direct the room not through power, but through steadiness. Leadership becomes less about pushing and more about anchoring. Your stillness becomes the organizing principle others orient around. This is the moment you realize something extraordinary. Stillness doesn't remove your power, it concentrates it. The turning point is not about becoming perfect. It is about recognizing that every old pattern has a delay, however small, before it fully takes over. And in that delay lies your doorway to freedom. When you catch the breath tightening, when you sense the field contracting, when you feel the urge to rush, explain, avoid, or collapse, you now know what to do. Hold still, not rigidly, not fearfully, but consciously. Become the riverbank for a moment. Become the sky that doesn't chase clouds. Become the observer who does not remeasure the same state. And from that place, you begin rewriting the strategy of your life. You start choosing aligned action instead of reactive behavior. You start designing your days from clarity rather than compensation. You start making decisions that reflect who you are becoming, not who you were protecting. This is the quiet revolution, less dramatic than people expect, but far more transformative. You stop living as the effect of your past and begin living as the cause of your future. You stop reacting to your reality and start participating in its formation. Stillness is no longer a pause. It is your new method. It is the hinge that shifts you from survival to creation, from fragmentation to coherence, from victimhood to authorship. In this turning point, you finally understand. You don't need the world to change before you can. You only needed to remember who the true observer is. There is a certain dignity that returns to you the moment you realize you don't have to chase your life anymore. A certain softness, a certain steadiness, a recognition that the world isn't asking you to outrun your fears, impress anyone, or constantly prove your worth. What the world has been asking quietly, repeatedly, is for you to come home to the part of yourself that has never been overwhelmed, never been confused, never been lost. The observer within you has always been there, watching the rivers of thought, the weather of emotion, the seasons of circumstance. Stillness is simply the moment you turn toward it, and something beautiful happens when you live even a little more from that place. You begin to feel your own humanity more clearly, not as weakness, but as coherence. You realize that every person you pass on the street is also carrying storms in their chest, interpretations in their breath, and a lifetime of inherited meaning running silently through their nervous system. You become gentler with people because you finally understand how hard it is to be alive in a world that doesn't teach the art of stillness. You see that most conflict is not malice but misalignment, not cruelty but confusion, not fate but fragmentation. Stillness becomes a form of compassion, not a moral posture but an energetic one, a way of not adding to the noise of the world, a way of bringing coherence into rooms that have forgotten their center, a way of being the mountain in the hurricane, the one point from which everything quietly reorganizes. This isn't grandiosity, it's responsibility of the softest kind. You're not trying to fix others. You are simply not contributing more chaos to the collective field. When you embody this, reality begins revealing itself differently. You start noticing subtle beauty, the kind you rushed past before. The way light gathers on a table, the way someone's voice cracks when they're trying to be strong, the way a single breath can change the direction of your entire day. These moments become your teachers, reminding you that life is not a race or a performance. It is a series of invitations to return to yourself again and again. In this sense, stillness becomes a kind of public art. You are sculpting the space around you through the way you inhabit your awareness. Your coherence influences your environment as surely as stress once did. People feel safer around you without knowing why. Conversations open more easily. Tension resolves with less friction. Your presence becomes permission for others to slow down, to breathe, to not collapse into their storms. You become a quiet lighthouse in a world of flickering signals. And yet, none of this requires perfection. You will forget. You will react. You will collapse back into old meanings. But the difference now is that you know the path home. One breath, one pause, one moment of stillness. Perfection is unnecessary when return is always possible. The observer is always a single exhale away from wherever you find yourself. This is where agency becomes real, not as control, but as participation. You understand that you are not a passive recipient of your life, nor are you the tyrant trying to force outcomes. You are something far more interesting, a collaborator with reality. You meet life halfway. You show up with your coherence, and life meets you with its possibilities. You act from alignment, and the field responds with clarity. You stop gripping and start listening. You stop pushing and start guiding. You stop performing and start inhabiting. Meaning begins to shift as well. You no longer seek grand purpose as something distant or monumental. Meaning emerges in the way you breathe through a difficult moment, in the way you steady your heart before responding to a loved one, in the way you choose presence over panic when the old loop tries to pull you back. Meaning becomes less about accomplishing something impressive and more about expressing something true. And beneath all of this is belonging. You begin to understand that you were never supposed to navigate life alone, not in the emotional sense. You belong to something larger, the field of human experience, the quiet lineage of those who chose awareness over reactivity, the community of people who recognize that consciousness shapes reality. You belong to the rhythm of breath that all beings share, the rise and fall that connects you to every life on this planet. You also belong to yourself in a way you may not have before, not as an idea, but as an experience. As the observer who can hold storms without collapsing, as the field that can welcome clouds without becoming them, as the awareness that can pause long enough to let possibility form before meaning rushes in. Stillness becomes the thread that ties everything together: your dignity, your agency, your humanity, your relationships, your clarity, your belonging. It is not withdrawal. It is readiness. It is not escaping reality. It is meeting reality on its own terms. It is not shrinking. It is expanding into your true size. As you walk forward from here, you carry this quiet understanding. The most powerful thing you can bring into the world is the coherence of your own presence, the steadiness of your inner sky, the truth that you are both the witness and the artist of your life. And in that realization, life itself begins to feel like an open door. Stillness becomes not a pause, but a passage, a way of stepping into a reality that was waiting for you to remember your own name. Before you leave this space, there is one final moment, a closing ritual designed not as performance, but as alignment. Think of it as sealing the frequency you've been opening within yourself. In a world that rushes you past your own awareness, this is your chance to mark a threshold, a moment that says, I am no longer observing my life from the place I used to stand. So let's begin gently. First, wherever you are, allow your body to settle by just a fraction. You don't need perfect posture. You don't need silence. You don't need spiritual certainty. All you need is a willingness to arrive in this moment with a bit more presence than the moment before. Now take a slow inhale, not dramatic, not forced, just a breath that feels like it belongs to you. When your lungs reach a natural fullness, pause. Feel that subtle suspension, that small doorway we've been calling the gap. Hold your awareness there for a heartbeat, then exhale softly, letting the breath fall out without effort. That's breath one. Let's do it again. Inhale gently, sensing the space around you as part of the inhale, not separate from it. Let the breath rise like a quiet tide. At the top, pause once more, touching that faint shimmer of stillness that sits between states. Exhale and imagine the exhale brushing dust from the edges of your field, smoothing the atmosphere around you. That's breath two. One more. Inhale slowly, and this time imagine the inhale drawing you deeper into the observer, the part of you that watches without fear, listens without urgency, sees without collapsing. Pause. Then exhale as if releasing the last thread of an old story. the kind that once convinced you had no choice but to live inside the loop. That's breath 3. Now stay here, not holding your breath, but holding your awareness. In this softened state, I want you to choose a single word, a word that represents the frequency you want to embody moving forward. Not a goal, not a wish, a frequency, something simple, something true. A word like clarity, coherence, ease, trust, presence, courage, stillness, or anything that rises from within rather than from expectation. Feel the word. Don't repeat it yet. Just let it land in your chest, in your breath, in your field. And now, whisper it internally or aloud, followed by this declaration. I choose to, your word, as the observer, not as the reactor, not as the wounded self, not as the hurried self, as the observer, the one who collapses reality from coherence, not chaos. Feel how that lands inside you. Feel how real it becomes when spoken from stillness rather than strain. This is not a slogan. It is an alignment, a message to the field around you, a calibration of your awareness, a quiet promise to yourself that you will return to this place whenever the world tries to pull you back into the old loop. Before we close, I want you to remember this. You don't have to hold this state perfectly. Nobody does. The power is not in perfection. It is in returning. Return with one breath. Return with one pause. Return with one moment of stillness. That's all it takes to step back into the observer, the field, the riverbank, the sky, the part of you that already knows how to move through life with clarity and coherence. If this practice resonates with you, if this frequency feels like home, then subscribe to this channel, not just as a button click, but as an intentional act. A way of saying, I am choosing this path. I am choosing this awareness. I am choosing this version of myself. Subscribe to this frequency so we can continue walking this path together. Take one last gentle breath. Feel the stillness behind it. And carry that stillness into whatever comes next. You were meant to hold still today. And now, you know why.